I've got a little. I'm a little more flexible, and it's good to be with Chairwoman Fox. We've been. She's done a great job in leading, and hopefully we can get together on many of the initiatives she's going to mention and make some progress. So, Chairwoman Fox, it's good to be with you.
Thanks, Bobby. I appreciate it. We're in a kind of a weird time right now with things becoming compressed. So I thank you for inviting me to be with you. 40 years ago, people said that we're going to change careers 7 times in our lives. That has accelerated over the last 40 years. And what we're trying to do on the committee, and I really appreciate Congressman Scott we're working very closely together on issues related particularly to workforce issues. We want to hopefully pass a really, really good workforce Pell Act, which would give us 2 main priorities. One, a short-term skills development program that's going to measure a student's return on investment. We want to make sure that people participating in these programs have a great outcome. And then we also would like to be able to offer every single option available to students, whether it's bricks and mortar or whether it's online. And we're still working on that issue. But we're in the greatest time in the world for education when there's so many opportunities out there. But we want, again, for young people in particular, to get some basic skills in whatever field they want to go into, and then be able to get a job and then continue to learn on the job. I'm sure Congressman Scott would tell you he and I are learning every single day. So learning is a lifelong issue, but people need to get those basic skills. For me, it was typing. I took typing in high school, and thankfully that allowed me to work my way through college and then be able to move into lots of other things. I'm told that I have 1 minute to wrap up. We also want to do a revision of WIOA and, again, build on helping people get the skills that they need. We want, again, to focus on outcomes, and we want to focus on the individual student and making sure that that student has the best experience possible, no matter what the delivery is for that student. So that's what we're hoping to do. And I know that Congressman Scott has many of the same concerns that I have, and we are committed to work together to get something done in a positive way, not only for young people, but for all people. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that the schedule has turned out this way. Invite me again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox. Thank you for coming. Ranking Member Scott, if you'd like to provide your opening remarks next, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, and I thank Dr. Fox. She's they're doing a lot of scheduling, trying to do the last minute stuff so we can keep the government open, and so the schedule is beyond her control. But I want to thank you and Kristen for what you've been doing, and thank everybody. I'm Bobby Scott, representing Virginia's 3rd Congressional District, and I serve as the Democratic leader for the House Committee on Education and Workforce. Over the past 2 years, we've seen the first and second strongest years for job growth in American history. This historic growth was a direct result of the policies that we advanced with working with President Biden. The American Rescue Plan Act helped vulnerable workers get through the pandemic and keep them in the workforce. The Inflation Reduction Act, excuse me, and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Plan took key steps to accelerate our economic growth and lower costs for working families. These bold policies not only saved, but created tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs and giving workers a strong foothold in the middle class. As you know, the on-the-job training and quality career work in tandem to ensure that workers, regardless of whether they have a college degree, can gain a foothold in the industry even before they're hired by an employer. So in fact, according to the Department of Labor, 93% of people who complete a registered apprenticeship program are employed right at completion. They earn while they learn, so they come out with no debt, and they earn an average of $77,000 a year. Businesses also earned about almost $1.50 for every dollar invested in the registered program and the benefits they get. And so when we meaningfully invest in our workforce, both workers and employers can win. The nation's workforce development system should function effectively enough to ensure that workers looking for high-paying careers and businesses looking for highly skilled workers can work in tandem and both benefit. However, Congress has chronically underfunded our workforce development programs for decades, resulting in fewer skills, training, and workforce development services available for those who need them the most. And that would include young people, people who've been forced out of their jobs, and justice-involved individuals. And that's why I continue to champion legislation that reinvests in the registered apprenticeship program so that young people can earn while they learn. This spring, I reintroduced the National Apprenticeship Act of 2023, which would create 1 million high-demand apprenticeship opportunities over 5 years, improve apprenticeship program standards, and save the taxpayers an estimated $10 billion in increased revenues from higher worker pay and productivity, and savings from social service programs that the workers would otherwise have been would be taken advantage of. And this includes the program would include pre-apprenticeships and youth apprenticeships that can benefit young people before they graduate from high school. My colleagues and I are also working, as Chairman Fox did, to reauthorize the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, WIOA or WIOA, which is a backbone of our workforce development system. By reauthorizing WIOA, we have a unique opportunity to help more people, particularly those from underrepresented communities, access high-quality training programs that lead to better career paths. One of my top priorities is to ensure that WIOA reauthorization includes Opening Doors for Youth Act. This proposal puts nearly $7 billion towards expanding summer and year-round job opportunities for young people, and this investment would help more at-risk and opportunity youth go into college or a rewarding career. And finally, I remain hopeful that we can come together and expand the Pell Grant program to short-term training programs like science, data science certificates, or welding programs. Right now, Pell Grants can only be used essentially for college courses that lead to college degrees. If all it leads to is a good job, can't use the Pell Grant. I think most people view that as ridiculous. If it leads to a good job, you ought to be able to use the Pell Grant. And currently, many people cannot afford training courses that could help them get those good paying jobs. This is a disservice to students, workers, and employers looking for qualified skills, people with the appropriate skills. This Congress, I introduced the Jobs to Compete Act to expand Pell Grant eligibility to high-quality short-term training programs and help more Americans benefit from these opportunities. There's a similar bill introduced by Chairwoman Fox and Republicans on the Ed and Workforce Committee, and there's a Senate bill, and we're working to get one of them enacted. And if we work together, this initiative would represent a huge job training opportunity and a huge influx of funding for job training programs. The question between the different bills is how we can guarantee that they're only funding quality programs. We don't want shysters setting up a little storefront operation, dealing out worthless certificates and taking all the money. So if we can figure out how to limit it to quality, I think we're all on the same page. And a little push from the Invincibles would be helpful. A little outside pressure, keeping us on task, and make sure we don't get into political fights. That would be helpful. So when we fully invest in our workforce system, we can signal to every worker that they can compete and win in the modern economy. So I want to thank you all from the Young Invincibles to empower young voices to expand and access economic opportunity for all. And so I want to thank you for the opportunity to be with you. Just stay on us, because I think we have a lot of potential in this Congress, even though, as everybody knows, we're in a state of dysfunction. I think there's some things that we can actually get together on and succeed, even in this atmosphere, and with a little help, we'll get that job done.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ranking Member Scott, for joining us today. Next, I'm going to kick it over to our Executive Director, Kristen McGuire, where she leads the charge to amplify the voices of young adults in the political process and expand their economic opportunity. Kristen, if you'd love to take it away.
Thank you so much, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at Young Invincible's second Thought Leaders Town Hall. As you heard, my name is Kristen McGuire, and I am the Executive Director at Young Invincibles. And we are very proud to say that we are one of the largest national young adult advocacy and policy organizations. And we work to amplify the voices of young adults in the political process and expand economic opportunity so that young adults can reach their fullest potential. And speaking of potential, today we're here talking about developing opportunities in the workforce so that all young people can find a pathway to a stable and fulfilling career. We will be discussing short-term Pell Grants, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and the Registered Apprenticeship Program. These are all important policy levers for expanding career pathways for young adults. We kicked off today's discussion hearing from Chairwoman Virginia Fox from North Carolina and Ranking Member Bobby Scott from Virginia. And I want to thank them both for adding to this very necessary discussion while simultaneously working to keep our government open. I want to make sure that we let you know that we appreciate your service. To our guests, we're excited to have you here today to discuss the ways to expand economic opportunity for young adults through workforce policy. Young adults have entered the workforce in a much harsher economic landscape than previous generations. Between the Great Recession, skyrocketing student debt, and more recently, the COVID-19 pandemic, young people have been forced to adapt and find new ways to meaningful careers. The pathways to those careers might look different for this generation compared to those ones before. And so, workforce policies need to evolve with the needs of young workers and with the times. And that's why we're here, to have a robust discussion about what young people and young people in the workforce need to continue to evolve and thrive. We're happy to share that we have congressional leadership on both sides of the aisle working with us. And so without further ado, let's get this thing started. Alex?
Yes, amazing. Thank you so much, Kristen. So I will go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. We have Dr. Kayla Elliott from the Joint Center. She's the Director of Workforce Policy at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, America's Black think tank. Her team centers Black communities and policy solutions for the future of work, workforce development, and access to goods. Kayla was previously Director of Higher Education Policy at EdTrust and has held teaching and research positions at Florida Atlantic University, where she earned her PhD. And she also holds a master's in philanthropy. She worked with a range of nonprofits on diversity, development, and engagement. She's a proud graduate of Fisk University and is a fierce HBCU advocate. Next, we have Luke Ryan. He's the Deputy Assistant Director for the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education with the United States Department of Education. And prior to joining the Biden administration, Luke served as the Associate Secretary of Workforce Development for the Delaware Department of Education, overseeing the Offices of Career and Technical Education, Higher Education, Educator Excellence, Licensure and Certification. And previously, Luke has worked at the Maryland State Department of Education and as a high school CTE teacher and middle school teacher. And we do have a young advocate joining as well. They are just running a couple minutes behind, having some technical difficulties. But her name is Jennifer Cobb. She's the first female electric graduate from Propel Academy in 2023. She has 4 years in the electrical trade and is a proud journeyman electrician. She is also a first-year instructor at the National Center for Construction, Education, and Research. And she lives and works in the greater Austin area, Texas area, and is a proud mother of 2 boys. So as soon as she has her, or as soon as she's available to join, we'll get her input on some things as well. But to kick it off with our panelists, I'd like to ask you both, generally, what are we seeing today in the workforce, and what brought us here today, and like, why are we discussing career pathways for young adults? Like, why is this important? And I will open it up to anybody who'd like to start.
So I think the thing on everybody's mind is what's going on, what's going on in the next couple of days. And we've seen really over the last year, over the last few years, a pretty unprecedented investment into a number of different avenues, whether that was the American Rescue Plan, infrastructure investment, CHIPS and science, that are making technical careers and specific industries more appealing, but also increasing the employment there. And I think needing young folks who are prepared for and have the necessary training, skills, and certification to do that work is very real and very, very current, right? Like that's the moment we're in now, thinking about like recent policy. But I do think there's a long history, right, of career and technical education, which before this was vocational education, and before that was something else. And I think that the renewed interest is very much around like what we've experienced in the last few years, around like job loss due to COVID, and due to COVID-19 and the economic effects, especially those that significantly affected Black households, from job loss, food insecurity, housing issues, infection rates. Like there's a real need and a real attention to career and technical education, I believe, in order to make sure that folks who we're seeing lose a lot of jobs to automation and a number of other things actually have some options.
I would just piggyback. So to Kayla's point, there's about $2 trillion that's being invested in states across the country through the bipartisan infrastructure law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. And the numbers are staggering. It's $1.2 trillion in infrastructure and will roll out, I mean, principally over the next 5 to 7 years. It is $270 billion around energy provisions for the Inflation Reduction Act. It's $380 billion that's attached to the CHIPS and Science Act to support manufacturing, semiconductor production, among other things in terms of research and development and STEM education. Those are remarkable amounts of money, and they are rolling out to every state and territory across and tribal community across our country. And this will create tens of millions of jobs. And what's really unique about this particular moment in time is that job growth is actually going to build over time. So as companies break ground on new infrastructure, new facilities, right, there'll be this dearth of producing and building that particular facility. And then those companies are going to seek to staff those companies. So the job growth is going to continue to uptick just, again, over the next 5 to 7 years, tens of millions of new opportunities. And what's really unique about these opportunities is it includes things like a 4-year degree as well as a short-term industry credential. So there is place in the economy, in the labor market, for individuals who hold some type of post-secondary credential or work experience beyond a high school diploma. So it creates many, many, many points of access to a good job in communities all across our country. And again, it will continue to grow and compound over time, particularly in the next 5 to 7 years. And then the big bet with bill, CHIPS, and IRA is essentially that in that timeline, 7 years from now, all of those investments will be self-sustaining and profitable, which means they will continue to grow and maintain that infrastructure and maintain that foothold in the communities that are fortunate enough to build this infrastructure. That is very different than the last 5 years in terms of our economy, which was, marked unemployment due to COVID, a rebound and a recession as a result of that. And just what I think we'll see in the next 5 to 7 is unlike what we saw in the last 5. And for young people, particularly young people who are positioned with skills, positioned with work experience, you will have an opportunity to rapidly accelerate your career, particularly in industries where you're going to see this $2 trillion of investment, manufacturing, energy, infrastructure, and then other care and service economies. So, and I think, I think you're also seeing states wrestle with things like education and the care economy that were so prevalent and hit hard during COVID. Those industries, those occupations are essential for communities to thrive. They're essential for young people to prosper. And we need to make sure that those individuals are compensated appropriately and are essentially given agency in terms of how their careers evolve. And I spent 10 years in the classroom. What I'm seeing in education in my industry is very different than what I saw 20 years ago. And it's wonderful. But that change has to continue to accelerate. It has to continue to keep pace with student interest. And that's my biggest concern right now is I want to make sure that our educational policy, our workforce policy is directly connected to student interest and that we double down on acceleration. And policy formats, particularly in the next couple of years, are going to set the stage for what happens over the next 5 to 7. And we have to get it right now in order to create a runway for young people to truly prosper and to take over the world, which is what you deserve, frankly.
And I would add to that, I love the point of really listening to students, listening to learners, listening to families on their interests, their needs, right? And I would dig a little deeper and say specific communities, right? I think national infrastructure investments are really encouraging, but there's some disconnect between federal investment and states' control of projects and training. So I think the federal government is prioritizing an equitable allocation of resources and thinking about communities of color and different groups that are underrepresented or underemployed. And I think the guidance to states, the expectation for states, the accountability for states to monitor and measure equitable access to those, both job opportunities, training opportunities, but also the funding and industry and small business setup is also a place that we need to really pay attention to because young people will be involved in all of those as well, for sure.
I love those answers, especially the part about young people taking over the world, right? That's what it's all about. We talked a lot about, investments in workforce training programs in both of those answers. So specifically, I want to go into a little depth in terms of a part of our, workforce agenda here at Young Invincibles is we've talked a lot about expanding young adult career pathways. And I want to talk about what that looks like through 2 avenues. So the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act specifically, reauthorizing that, and then the registered apprenticeship programs. With those 2 programs, and maybe tackle them both individually, what improvements do you think we can make in the coming years to make sure that young adults, are able to access, solid career pathways that get them into that high-paying job or that, help them find that career that makes them feel driven? And once again, I'll open it up to either one of you to start, whoever has thoughts right off the top of their head.
I'm happy to jump in, Kayla. Okay. So I think there are a couple things, and we want to tackle one at a time. Is that correct, Alex? So we want to talk about WEO or registered apprenticeship first?
Yeah, either one, whichever one you want to start with would be perfect.
Okay. So WEO, I think, first and foremost, you should be aware that states over the next several months will be going through either the re-envisioning of their current combined or unified state plan for WIOA. So those state plans are actually due in March of next calendar year, and they will essentially outline how the 6 core programs under WIOA function and also work in partnership with other, in my opinion, critical pieces of federal policy like Perkins or career and technical education, and intersect with the registered apprenticeship system or the veterans program or SNAP and TANF, right? So I think just first and foremost, the time to talk about WIOA is right now. The time to think about state engagement is exactly right now. And some of the ideas that you might want to see in a reauthorized WIOA could be ushered in your state's next state plan for WIOA. Right. So there's both an opportunity to advocate federally, but there's also an opportunity to change practice at the state and local level immediately. So I think what I would say under WIOA, there are a couple of different things. So you heard Ranking Member Scott earlier. We chronically underfund our workforce system. That is not an exaggeration. That is a wholehearted truth. And there are two programs under Title I of WIOA that impact youth directly. So the first is in-school youth programs. The second is out-of-school youth programs. In-school youth programs are designed to do exactly what they say. They're designed to support young people to graduate high school and transition into higher levels of education and the work. Yet in too many communities across our country, in-school youth programs are not developed in coordination with, this is going to come as a shock, schools, right? So it's local workforce boards and schools needing to work together in order to best support individuals who are most at risk of dropping out or withdrawing from high school, and making sure that there are the appropriate support services and community partners wrapped around that school and that community to make sure that young people are successful. The second thing is the out-of-school youth program. And essentially, what out-of-school youth means is a young person who is not engaged in the labor market and is not employed. This could be a young person who's graduated high school. It could also be a young person who has withdrawn or dropped out of high school, right? But essentially, they're not enrolled in education and they're not enrolled in the labor market or participating in the labor market. We have to do a better job of offering out-of-school youth programs that provide real pathways to opportunity, and making sure that we help to educate and support the whole person. So I think it's a combination of multiple things, but it's a combination of education, it's a combination of support services, and it's a combination of helping that person build work experience and trajectory to continue to grow and to continue their education. Those are just a couple quick things off of WIOA, and I will turn it over before we talk about apprenticeship.
Yeah, so I think we've got some pretty specific recommendations for reauthorizing and improving WIOA with a very, it's the Joint Center, so a very particular eye to Black learners and workers. So I think we have some deep concerns about occupational segregation and wanting guardrails put in place to protect Black workers from being tracked into or out into low wage positions and roles and industries, and out of higher wage and higher earning counterparts. For sure. I think we're looking for some explicit acknowledgement of discrimination in hiring and in the workplace. I think putting that into policy, having recommendations, guidance, and actual consequences around that is a very key role that WIOA could play for sure. Compensation of Black workers who are shouldering the opportunity costs of training is important for sure. Data systems that track program level outcomes that is disaggregated by race, so we can see how Black workers are faring in each of these programs and WIOA funded programs, and then looking for some shared power and worker power with the workforce system decision makers, and being able to invest in how WIOA was shaped and how WIOA funded programs are impacted for sure. And then I can do apprenticeships and hand it back for sure. So we did some work around apprenticeships last year. My forebear, Alex Carmerdale, who was in this position about a year ago, was able to work with a number of Black workers, dig into the data, and come up with some real recommendations for the registered apprenticeship program for young Black Americans. And so establishing permanent funding for increasing equity in apprenticeships, we found that Black apprentices are underrepresented in apprenticeships broadly. So they only make up about 9% of all registered apprenticeships, despite being 12.3% of the workforce. They're least likely to complete programs. They come in at about a 41% completion rate compared to 47% for their Latino counterparts, 48% for white and indigenous apprentices, and 49% for AAPI apprentices. So looking forward to more support, student supports, wraparound services that help with transportation, childcare, and a number of other costs that come along with the actual learning for sure. They're also the lowest earners amongst their peers in other racial and ethnic groups. So looking to eliminate barriers to entry for people with low incomes. On average, exiting their programs, Black apprentices are at about $25 an hour, while their Latino counterparts are at $26, white apprentices at $28, and AAPI apprentices exit earning $30 an hour. So looking for both some improvements to the registered apprenticeship program that increase equity and representation across the types of programs they are in, but also in the earnings for sure. So also looking for changes that would allow college credit for apprenticeship training and make that credit both stackable, trackable, and transferable, and developing a national system to track unregistered apprenticeship outcomes as well.
I would just add to the desire for transparency and the ability to stack credentials into degrees. And I think it cuts both ways in terms of our higher education system. So there is substantial opportunity for 2-year and 4-year institutions to move into the registered apprenticeship space, yet many do not. And there is an opportunity to increase the types of credentials that are offered within apprenticeship programs that do carry credit value, and they do help individuals who exit with their journey person's certificate or their certificate of completion to also have that, as Kayla mentioned, count towards a degree program should they wish to pursue and continue their education beyond the apprenticeship program. The other thing I would point out that we just don't do is we don't talk about registered apprenticeship to young people at all. It is not something that we talk about in terms of exploring post-secondary pathways. And too few people actually understand how the system works within states, which employers participate, what occupations a young person can enter in terms of the apprenticeship system. And it tends to be based on the young person's network. If you know someone who's in registered apprenticeship, they can help navigate. Otherwise, you're kind of left to your own devices in terms of how you enter and find an employer that's willing to sponsor you with a registered apprenticeship. And I think, leaving opportunity to chance is not something that we can continue to do. There needs to be much more structured points of entry and ways in which we systemically talk about registered apprenticeship to young people. It needs to be something that we do with employers. Employer recruitment into our education and workforce system is very difficult. It takes a lot of time and effort. It is very challenging. For the majority of apprentices and apprenticeship programs, they are employer sponsored and employer led. So moving from employer to employer to employer is a very difficult way to scale an education and training system unless there are actual supports for the employer to do that work and to ensure that they are enrolling and hiring from the communities that we want to see registered apprenticeship grow and scale. And we sometimes collectively do not get that right in states. And we do not get that right in terms of how we manage the federal registered apprenticeship program. I also think that there have been quite a few investments in apprenticeship in terms of how it expands into different occupations and different industries. So movement into IT or information technology, movement into hospitality careers, and moving essentially just beyond the traditional construction industry is a good thing for the apprenticeship program. One of the industries that I'm a little bit biased in terms of education, but I'm really excited to see that there are opportunities for teacher apprenticeship programs. When I was in college, I participated in, I guess, essentially my student teaching experience. But it's lovely to see that people are actually getting paid for that work. You are a valued member of the workforce. You should be compensated for that work product. And it's wonderful that there is the acknowledgement of that, and there are opportunities to support financially young people to continue their education while enrolled in the workforce. And apprenticeship really is and has the opportunity to be exactly what we want in terms of helping young people to build social and economic capital simultaneously to skill development.
Amazing. Our next question deals a lot with credentials, so we're looking forward to that. I like that we're talking about stackable credentials too. That's so important. But I want to give, so our young adult panelist was unfortunately had a conflict and won't be able to attend, but we did have a previous young advocate and now an employer or employee of YI join us today. So I'll give Liz a chance to introduce herself, and then we'll jump into the next question.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Liz Kufor. I am the Southern Program Coordinator at Young Invincibles, operating out of the YI Texas office. I did start off as an intern at Young Invincibles before becoming a super advocate and eventually a full-time role. Very passionate about workforce development as it's one of YI's key issue areas, and had the opportunity to work with the Young Women's Apprenticeship Council, which is a paid young adult engagement program where we connect with different women who want to talk about their apprenticeship experiences from the perspective of parenting mothers as well as women. So really excited to contribute to this conversation today.
Amazing. So our next question, we talked about credentials, and that kind of like segues into our next question, which we released a larger report this month called the Reimagining the Federal Pell Grants, Reimagining the Talent Pipeline for Young Adults. It's a brief all discussing this concept of what's been talked about frequently, like short-term Pell Grants. So as another policy lever, why are short-term credential or career readiness programs becoming more popular among young adults or just people in general? And what concerns do we have as legislators are considering opening up federal Pell Grants for these types of programs? What concerns do we have for such a program, that we should consider with any proposal that may come to pass? And whoever would like to start with that one, I would gladly open it up.
Yeah, I think a number of things have led us to where we are. And Luke and I kind of spoke to that to begin, or when we began. But I do think that we know to be true that you need a post-secondary credential for economic stability and advancement in this economy. That is how it works, because we live in a country, society, and setup where health insurance and other benefits are tied to employment. We know that those jobs that offer those things require some form of post-secondary credential for sure. And so whatever that credential can be, we want to open those pathways for sure, like to a quality credential that allows you a pathway to economic stability, employment, and advancement. And I think, all of our organizations have spent a number of time also thinking about college cost and student debt. And so the traditional 4-year pathway, one, was never truly accessible to everyone, but two, is now very unaffordable for many. And we are seeing long-term what student debt and the looming cost of college can mean long-term for borrowers, for sure, particularly Black borrowers who borrow more who borrow more, pay back slower, and a number of other indicators for sure. But I also think that like Joint Center had some work about the future of work and automation, and almost a quarter of jobs in the Black rural South could be displaced by automation by 2030, right? More than 31% of Latino workers, 27% of Black workers, 24% of white workers, and 20% of Asian American workers are concentrated in 30 occupations at high risk to automation, whether that's retail, cashiering, secretaries, cooks, drivers, and others. And that's real. I think people feel that even if they don't know the figures and numbers, but I know that states, employers know this as well. And states that are planning, federal legislators that are planning, those of us who care and know about this are planning for those folks who are being displaced by automation to have a real credential that gives them a path to employment for sure. And I also think like there's support for this, right? In our survey, about 2/3 of all respondents believe that allowing short-term Pell would make a lot of sense and would make college more affordable and should be an important or top priority for Congress. And Black respondents and multiracial respondents were more likely than their white and Hispanic counterparts to believe that. So about 74% of our Black respondents, 73% of our multiracial respondents believe that allowing students to use Pell Grants for short-term programs should be a top priority for Congress. Overall, only 4% of people believe that it shouldn't be a priority, right? Like they believed it should be at some level of priority or importance. 96% of our respondents believe that it should be somewhere on the radar and possible. So I think all of those are contributing to to what we're seeing as an increase in attention to short-term Pell for sure.
Amazing. Liz or Ryan or Luke, do you have any points you'd like to
Yeah. I'll keep it brief. So we know that apprenticeship programs are also becoming very diverse as additional industries like tech are being incorporated, and they're looking for different ways to employ apprenticeship as a strategy to train the workforce. So in Texas in particular, a lot of the jobs that are available are what they call middle skill jobs, accounting for over 50% of the need for the workforce. So kind of echoing what was said, one of the reasons why we can see an increase in popularity is because there's an opportunity for folks to complete high school and find a quick entry into the workforce through these short-term programs that offer them valuable skills to jump to the job market and start taking care of their families. Again, from our perspective, we spoke a lot with women who also are parents. So having that additional need to have avoid debt if possible, but able to provide for your family with a sustainable career. I think she also highlighted that college affordability is a big issue. So we know 4-year university degrees are sometimes unattainable when it comes to college costs. So internships offer an alternative for a good career, post-secondary training, and then also sustainability in the future. I think one concern would just be, of course, credential stacking, which I think Luke mentioned. So if folks do want to return to want to go back to their academic career, being able to take what they've already learned and apply that some type of like academic credit or so would be really important.
What I would echo comments. I think there's tremendous potential in the short-term space, and I think there are opportunities to recognize many pathways into a quality job. But as Kayla mentioned, a post-secondary credential is going to be prerequisite for almost any job that provides any type of living wage or any type of benefit or any type of just infrastructure around the wage that is offered. I think a couple things. So, one of the things that we are working to scale, particularly through our office in Octay, is student access in high school to industry credential programs alongside of career and technical education. So again, Kayla mentioned this earlier. And what our work here is, and this is through the Unlocking Career Success Initiative, it's to essentially make sure that we help students to complete kind of a college and career ready profile. So it includes things like industry credentials. It includes things like dual enrollment. It includes things like work-based learning, as well as career navigation supports, so that as a young person exits high school, they have multiple options that they can pursue in terms of continuing their education and entering the workforce. And most people are going to do more than one thing. Most people are going to learn and work simultaneously. So it's important that we create and recognize how people will transition right into adulthood, into the rest of their life, and the ability to, again, acquire education while building economic capital is incredibly important to build wealth. And I think this is a way that we can help young people to start building wealth earlier in their lives. In terms of risks, and Liz mentioned this, we have to make sure that all learning is cumulative, that learning can build off of, right, whatever credential you acquire, you can essentially take steps towards the next one. And that divide is real and it is pronounced. And across workforce and degree programs, across associate and bachelor degree programs, there are still too many terminal credentials that exist in our higher education system, where a person acquires what they think is a credential that will afford them the lifestyle that they want, only to find out that in a couple more years, right, they're going to be at the top of that wage threshold for that occupation, and frankly have to start all over again in terms of building that educational capital. And that's the risk. And we have to make sure that there are safeguards and supports around short-term Pell so that it truly makes education accessible, affordable, and frankly fluid, so that people can continue their education when and how they want.
I love it. So we're going to wrap up our panelist discussion, but I want to ask you all a final question. So lightning round really quick, because then we got to jump into Q&A, and we do have some questions. I'll ask each of you to kind of like summarize everything in this conversation into some like final thoughts or like a takeaway you'd like to leave with the audience. And then lastly, talk about briefly, if you could, in your like closing thoughts, how these are all interconnected. because we talk about a lot of these policies often as like a package deal. And whoever would like to start, I will. To whoever.
So I think my main takeaway is innovation is possible, but it's prerequisite around community and voice, and particularly students and their families. And I do think, to take advantage of the $2 trillion that will be invested in our country over the next 7 years, it's going to require coordination. It's going to require new legislation, and it's going to require different ways in terms of how we currently think about our secondary and post-secondary education system. So that's kind of my main synopsis. In terms of things that I would just also throw out there, I think people are hungry for this type of change, right? We're seeing kind of increased enrollments in career and technical education every single school year. We're seeing increased enrollment in community colleges rebounding quite aggressively in terms of what had been an enrollment dip during the pandemic. And we're seeing students move into post-secondary education who are informed about what career they want to enter, how they're going to acquire it, and the necessary steps that they need to take in order to pursue kind of the life that they want. And I think we have to continue to provide infrastructure and support in this space. And I do think that innovation is possible. And it really reflects, frankly, what people need and want in terms of how they access education.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Kayla. Sorry.
Sure. So I will say, like, innovation is possible, and equity is also possible, but only if we are intentional, only if we are specific, only if we, like Luke said, are in community with communities, right? If we are elevating the voices of young people, if we are speaking specifically to Black workers groups and their coalitions, listening to the Black Worker Bill of Rights, listening to the real demands that people have based on being those closest to the issue and closest to the solution. I think like that has to be a part of this, because so much funding is moving, because so much opportunity is being developed. Like we are building some things as we go. And if we are not intentional about ensuring that those building blocks are included now, it will be all the more harder to do that on the front, on the end, when we realize the inequities that have happened. So the more that we can do to ensure that folks are on the ground, that we are protecting students and learners, that we are thinking about families and communities, the more we are doing to invest businesses, to invest small businesses led by people of color, right? Like, to be thoughtful about the way that we're building this ship, the more likely all of us will get there.
I think my word of the day would just be intentionality. So being more intentional with how we are getting this information out to these young adults. A lot of them spoke about how word of mouth communication was how they found about their apprenticeship opportunity. But we know we live in a digital age where a lot of young people are on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. So also revamping our strategies to incorporate digital outreach to ensure that the information is reaching the actual audience. Collaborating with those businesses, making sure to do correct outreach to ensure that we're actually, publicizing opportunities, and then even going as far as to create like a centralized, accessible career information, so they can find this information, make sure nothing is missing. And then also we talk a lot about college readiness when we talk about higher education. So even investing in pre-apprenticeship programs to ensure folks have the skills necessary to transition into these careers that they want to get into is really important.
Amazing. So we have about 3 questions in the Q&A. Thank you so much to our panelists. So I'm going to go ahead and a majority of them are questions about short-term Pell. So I'm going to divide them up evenly, and we'll each take a question. So I'm going to start with Kayla. One participant asked, Ranking Member Scott alluded to the need for ensuring career training program quality. What are some of the key student protections advocates should push for in any short-term / workforce Pell legislation?
Yeah, and I will try to be brief. So I think like I am one, accountability is my jam. That's what I've been doing in the higher ed space, specifically for a number of years. And so I'm being pushed, right, to do that work here and to think about student protections and outcomes, right, and accountability for both of those in short-term Pell. And there are a number of things that I like. There are some things I don't. There are things that I have questions about, I'm not sure about. There are things I definitely want to see. Both New America and I want to say CAP, definitely Skills Coalition. A number of folks have put out a lot of recommendations that I think can be really helpful for this conversation. For me, licensing requirements and tying programs to that and ensuring, like, one, your instructional spending is focused on, or your spending is focused on instruction, and your instruction actually is thinking about the licensing requirements of that certificate. And so you should be preparing the student for the role and passing the test, right? So I think about what's actually happening with instruction for sure, and wanting a bit more guidance there. But the responsibility and accountability for outcomes has to be there, particularly labor market outcomes, earnings, when we know that the programs that are currently eligible for Pell, graduates are earning about $30,000, and Black graduates are earning less than that, right? $10,000 less than that 30, and about 40% of them are unemployed, right? Like 40% of graduates of 15-week programs are unemployed. And so I want to see more accountability for programs for earnings, both long-term and for job placement. Something like a high school earnings threshold could certainly be useful there. And I think I'll stop. We don't have much time.
Thank you. I know that there's a lot of proposals out there, so there's a lot to go over in terms of short-term Pell. But I think this next question would best be answered by Luke. What can employers or policymakers do to support students getting college credit for work aligned with students' degrees? It seems there are processes already in place, but perhaps there are bureaucratic hurdles or misinformation about the process.
So I think there are a couple things. Just I guess the first two is states will be, again, responding to WIOA state plans between now and next March. That is a policy vehicle. That is not an application for federal funds. That is a chance for states to put actual policy guardrails in place around the 6 core WIOA programs that it supports. In that same timeline, states will be making updates to their Perkins state plan, which governs career and technical education in that state. Those two things should be aligned in terms of the state's strategic vision, how it supports youth, and the types of sector strategies that it wants to see grow. So that's a very real thing kind of right now. In terms of the transference of work experience into credit, through both of those vehicles, states can usher in policies around credit for prior learning. And there are opportunities to look at, like, Perkins eligible institutions or publicly funded workforce systems to do evaluations of a person's work experience and then translate that to academic credit within a degree or clock hour equivalency if a person's pursuing a credential program. So there are opportunities to essentially transfer, right, work experience to advanced academic standing. The challenge here, and this goes back to Kayla's point, is universities and colleges do this very differently, and there's very limited data on the number of people who apply to have an evaluation of their work experience done as a credit for prior learning model, who is awarded that credit, how much of that credit is awarded, in what degrees is that credit awarded. There's very little information that's actually collected publicly. And again, these state plans are vehicles that states can use to create policy in this space. And so, like, Perkins is a good example. The majority of states invest well beyond the federal investment in career and technical education. So, using this state plan is a vehicle that not only governs how federal resources are allocated and, distributed, but it also has a ripple effect for how states invest in these systems as well, right? And, my encouragement is to kind of go do that, go be aggressive here. Work with post-secondary institutions, work with communities, work with students, think about ways in which we can accelerate learning collectively. It is frankly in everyone's best interest to make it easier for students to access post-secondary education and earn a credential or a degree. So, you know, it's, again, this is in everyone's shared interest to try to figure this out.
Thank you so much for that answer, Luke. Thank you all of our panelists, Luke, Kayla, Liz, thank you for your time. Thank you, Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member Scott for joining us for opening remarks. Thank you for all the attendees for joining us today. This wraps up our Thought Leaders Town Hall today, but we will have a follow-up survey for you all to ask what you felt or what you would have liked from this. And thank you all so much for joining, and enjoy the rest of your week. And we will follow up. We will have a recording available if you are interested in it. All right. Thank you all. Thank you, everyone.